Welcome to another exciting episode of the Business of Digital podcast, featuring your hosts, Matt Siltala and Dave Rohr. Hey guys, excited to have you on another one of these Business of Digital podcasts, and we are continuing with our 100th episode series, and I'm really excited to introduce to you guys just a long-time industry vet, Greg Boser. Hey Greg, how's it going?
I'm good. Thanks for including me as one of your old curmudgeons in the show here.
We love old curmudgeons on the show. But also we got Dave here somewhere. Hey Dave, can't forget Dave.
Here. I'm not muted. It always helps.
Yes. So we really do appreciate you. Like these have been a fun series for me to dive into, Greg, because it's just there's a lot of us that have been around for a long time, and there's some of us like yourself that have been around for even longer. And so it's kind of fun to just kind of jump back into it. And so how I've started these off, and it's been kind of fun to hear from people, is how, quote unquote, industry old are you? Like Dave, for example, is Florida Update old. I'm probably Alta Vista Netscape old or whatever. So where would you say you are old in the industry?
Well, as an SEO.
So, as an SEO, yes, thank you.
Because I was doing SEO technically, I think, before that, but I was still a web dev. So it wasn't until right before Florida that I was, I think, 95 or 100% SEO and not.
And that's a good reminder, too, Dave, because we are having Greg on as the SEO curmudgeon.
Yeah.
Right. Let me think. Okay, so from a purely trying to digital spamming, I'm a CompuServe, day.
Well, spamming and jamming would count as, I guess, SEO if you were spamming.
Right. You know hitting those forums and
or
that
a directory.
Was really my first thing. But I'm at the age that I was part of the argument about whether or not we should even call it SEO. Like that, I think Bruce took credit for that. I'm not sure that's true, and for the record, my vote was no, but so.
Yet here you are in SEO for many, many years.
Right. I always felt that.
What did you want it to be?
Well, when then as it progressed in the split between SEM and SEO, I just thought that was stupid. It's all marketing. It's all an attempt to build an audience and get traction for your products, and so this differentiation between SEM and SEO I thought was stupid. And back then the argument, what we called them the checkbook SEOs, the ones that couldn't actually do SEO, that they went and did paid because it was really super easy at that time period. So we didn't really have a whole lot of respect for them, and they wanted their own name. They just wanted their own thing. So I always felt that the umbrella of SEM encompassed all aspects of, trying to generate business based on people's quest for knowledge, right? You sit down, I don't care where you do it, you sit down, you type into a little box and you want to learn about something. Anything involved with that to me is search engine marketing, really. But I didn't win, and so it became SEO, and that was InfoSeek, Excite, early Alta Vista, those kind of things. And it was way before, the really crazy thing was everything was driven off of email discussion lists, You'd have debates and arguments and you'd wait a week.
Jeez.
We all were really just sitting in our bedrooms in our underwear trying to fake it till we make it. And there's like 20 of us, Marshall Simmons and Detlef Johnson, and that was like, you would really have a whole week to write this profound response, and then you would sit around and wait till Thursday for it to get published. It was the craziest thing because everything is so instantaneous now, right? Twitter and everything, it was just such a completely different thing. So a lot of relationships got forged in that, Jill Whalen and a lot of people in that original kind of small group of people trying to figure out if there was a future and an industry could be built around this idea of search. So that made it kind of an exciting, unique time for sure.
Well, that's perfect segue into, and if that's it, you could tell me, hey Matt, that was it. But as thinking back on this, and as you're thinking about your earliest industry memories, What's something that excited you the most about, like, when you think back to when you got in this industry, and like just what made you just pumped to be a part of it, and like, hey, this is what I'm going to do for the next 20 years until I kind of like am where you are now?
Well, even before, I guess I was like technically an SEO, I'll never forget when AOL first kind of rolled out a web browser bundled into their walled off garden, and on dial up, and at the time I was doing marketing for a company that did home fire defense systems in the urban interface of Southern California, right? So when the fires came through, you could spray your house down with this protective foam and it would keep it from burning down. And I that's how I started trying to recruit a sales team with retired firefighters that would hang out in CompuServe discussion rooms, that kind of thing. So, but I'll never forget the first time trying to do research and finding that web browser and typing in a search and waiting literally 4 minutes to connect, but getting connected to a data server in Australia where I'm downloading data sets of stuff about how they deal with what they call bush fires. They're not wildfires, but and I just had this profound moment where I sat there and went, that's really the other side of the planet.
Yeah.
And I now had, like, it just blew me away, and it made me at that point, that really was kind of a pivotal change to where I thought, beyond using the internet to market this business space that I was already in, is this becomes something all on its own. There's no way this doesn't
like change. Your little world just expanded freaking 100.
Right. There's just the idea of that when you have a question, you could type into a box and basically ask anybody on the planet. Wow. Like, I saw that big picture thing and I said, in my mind, there's just no way this doesn't dramatically change human existence, really. And there's got to be some money in it, like there's no way that, and then, that's kind of when I started on the path of trying to convince my wife, I swear, babe, this is going to be a thing. Like, you should let me not have a job and stay home and while you go bust your ass and pay for the health insurance and cash to feed our little kid, all that kind of stuff, because this is going to pan out. God bless her for saying okay, because it turned out all right. But and now look, I mean, it's just
Kardashian butt photos. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think.
How did we go from there to there?
Let's not pivot there, you two.
I know.
For a moment, we can go there in a second.
Yeah, I know.
But
that was just when he was being all profound and talking about how awesome this was. I'm like,
right, I know.
And somehow we now have people just posting selfies of stupid stuff, and
we always find ways to burn it to the ground. I don't,
Yeah,
that wasn't even an SEO's fault. Normally, it's our fault.
But if we could have,
my wife's always accusing me of, or us type, not me specifically, but our type of ruining like Pinterest for her. So she's moved on to Reddit. Anyway,
well, of course.
But my question, though, with what you were saying, or not, I guess it's not really a question, just kind of like an observation, was, when you're talking about how profound that was to you, it's something like kids these days, we're going to definitely sound like the old curmudgeons, but, that's something that they take for granted, that they could just pull up, almost anything, whether it's Google, Twitter, Instagram, they can search and they can basically find exactly what they're looking for within a second. They don't realize, like, when you shared that, it kind of made me just kind of think about, like, how powerful that moment must have been, because, like, it's all stuff that they take for granted now. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, and it's interesting because my kids are kind of on that. They straddle that age where, the internet started when they were really young, so they didn't necessarily grow up from the get-go. Like, they kind of saw it come in, and it's interesting to see how. But the way that it's completely consumed, like they couldn't function without their cell phone and the ability to get instant answers. I think the downside is they just automatically accept those answers and they don't understand how that's controlled now as far as ads. And I don't think there's that quite the questioning that goes on. But I can't even imagine. When I look in life without the internet and cell phones and that instant connectivity, like wonder how we even raise children. I wonder how we were raised. Like, it just blows me away that, you know, the idea of now in today's time, your mom kicking you out the door at 9 a.m. and saying, be back before the street light comes on during the summer.
Yeah.
And that, you know, no connection to your kids or like.
Oh, that's scary.
It is. It seems that way now, and it's never seemed that way as a kid, you know.
Well, the first question is, how much trouble did you get into today?
Exactly.
It's like,
Exactly.
oh, I see you're on time.
What do you need to tell me about?
Instead of being able to track them and know exactly where they were and say, what do you need to tell me you did today?
Yeah. And there was that out on your own kind of wild west thing. And the early days of search, and that's kind of what made it so appealing to me. And the interesting thing about, you know, my generation in this business is that for all of us, it was a career pivot of some, you know, none of us grew up and said, hey, I want to be a digital marketer or an SEO or whatever the buzzword is at the time. Every person in that small little batch of people back then came from a completely different I mean, I was, you know, 30 years old almost. Yeah, I was when really it took off. So there was a whole half a lifetime before of completely different stuff. So that made it very unique. And the other aspect of it was there, you know, it wasn't a degree you could go get. There was no online courses. There was no blogs, thank God. It was really, and the funny thing about it is we never dreamed in a million years that we would ever run into each other competitively. Yeah. The web was such a big, wide open that we helped each other. We shared, you know, we did our own research. We, you know, back when we used to talk about our pitch back then was 99% even explaining to a potential client what search is and why they should care, like where it's going to go. It wasn't about rankings and all that kind of stuff. Like that was literally, you'd go meet with a client for 3 hours. 2 hours was just selling them on the idea that they should even care about search because it was that new and that unique. And so that whole process, everything involved in that just is so different than how it all works now. And I'm not saying one's better than the other, but it really changes your perspective as far as how you look on the industry and how you determine or make decisions on who to listen to and you know, things like that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you were talking about that kind of made me think back to even my own beginnings, if you will. It's kind of funny because there was no, like you said, you know, there was no formal education or degree in SEO or online marketing or anything like that. And, you know, I got my degree in, at the time I was going to school, my degree was in computer information systems, CIS or whatever they called it. And because of that, I was working at a radio station at the time. I was a co-host on all right, no laughing at me, Dave or Greg, morning country show. I said no laughing.
I'm sorry. Yeehaw. I guess I just laughed. But that's in a good way.
But because they knew what I was doing for college, they just assumed that I could do everything with computers. And so they hired me to build their first, the website, or the 3 sister stations that we had, for their first 3 websites, essentially. And that's kind of how I got my into this industry. I just, you know, I'm one of those dumb students that's like, oh yeah, sure, I can do that. Kind of like how I think a lot of us have done things in this industry. You know, we're asked if we could do something and we say sure, and then we go and figure out how to do it.
Fake it till you make it, baby. That's how, you know, everybody did that. No matter what anybody says. And for me, you know, before I got it, I used to own started out as an auto detailing business, and it morphed into an aircraft detailing thing.
Oh, wow.
But I'll never forget, you know, the first client I ever had there was, this is like, I don't know, 1991 maybe, you know, and he had this brand new, it was like right when the Lexus's model first came out, and I convinced this guy that I had 5-10 years experience in detailing these upper kind of cars, and it was really the first one I've ever done for money, ever. But before doing that, I went and I got a job as a grunt, and I went and worked for other guys, and I just did a ton of research and had a lot of knowledge. I just didn't have experience, and it just took me a while to have the experience match the knowledge set. But until that happened, I bullshitted my way through a lot of stuff, and that's part of the gig.
Makes me laugh so hard because I think of my brother. He was about 20 years old, and he was showing me these business cards, me and my dad, and he was starting this landscape service, and it said 15 years experience. My dad's like, "You're only 20."
Yeah.
And he's like, "But you made me start mowing lawns when I was 5."
Right?
Okay, good point.
I think that's totally fair.
Yeah. Silly.
And it's not a negative thing, and it's still a lot of ways. It's interesting now when I watch up and coming, I call them kids, not in a disrespectful way, but young people entering this business. And, I know they're, from a practicality and an experience standpoint, they're full of it because they just don't have it. But I don't really view that as a bad thing. I kind of look at it to see how good they are at all that prep work and all that knowledge collection and all that stuff, and how good they are at spinning, because you got to do that.
Yeah.
There's no replacement for time and experience. And in that interim, you have to learn how to learn.
Well, I mean, think about how many sites of your own, or I look back to even stuff that I did. Like, I burned so many sites, and I joke about this with people. I still think that if anyone with the last name of Siltala applies for Google AdSense, they're automatically denied because they have the Siltala last name. Like, I don't have any proof of this, but
yeah. Well, that was my whole thing. That was testing and burning stuff to the ground was what you did.
Yeah.
Like, that's how you truly learn. And I can remember, conversations with Matt where it's like, dude, I know you think the algorithm does that, but it really doesn't.
You mean Matt Cutts?
Yes.
Yeah.
I saw something recently where someone said they were talking about Matt Cutts in a thread. It was somewhere, and they said who.
Well,
that just kind of shows how long they'd been in the industry or
kids
not.
These days.
I really miss that guy, by the way.
Yeah.
And that was him leaving was kind of a big part of me kind of losing my love for the space, and not. He was a fun guy, and with a
I totally agree.
Very, very challenging job.
Oh, good God.
But really a guy that was really big on trust, and letting, actually engaging with this on a level that's not 140 character rusty brick regurgitation thing.
Well, and I love,
Like,
I just found the other day I was going through some photographs, and I found like the very first SMX Advanced. There was where they had those parties at the garage that the SEO Moz at the time would throw.
Yeah.
And there was a picture of I was shooting pool with Matt Cutts, and I was just like, the same feeling that you just had, Greg. I was like, I miss those days.
Yeah.
Probably one of the better photos I've ever taken randomly was in 2006 at the SMX Advanced. Carolyn and I were up on the Space Needle, and all of a sudden there's Matt Cutts knocking on the glass from inside, and then puts his face up against it, and somehow I got a picture of him, and I just labeled it like the ghost in Google's machine or something like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys ever got to play Werewolf.
I didn't.
We're at the Googleplex one time, and it's this game that they used to play there, and it's like, I don't even remember exactly how to play it, but it's like a card game, and there's bluffing and stuff involved, and I remember getting to the end and beating Matt because calling him on his bluff was like, okay, if I'm right, then you get me a free get out of jail spam penalty card for one site. Right? And
he probably said no.
He couldn't hold his bluff because he was too pure and honest, kind of guy. So a lot of fun times with him, though.
That's a good segue from pure and honest to who coined the phrase PPC? Not what those other people that couldn't hack it do. Do you remember?
I feel like that came out of GoTo. Pay per click, but I'll tell you what.
No, Pills Porn Casino.
Oh, Pills Porn. Oh, okay, that version. Yeah, that
version.
That definitely came out of
Is that
A
an
lot
oil
of that,
man or
a lot
you,
of that
or-
terminology. It's. I don't know. I think there's a lot of stuff I get credit for that I shouldn't. And I'll tell you an example: organic SEO. Like that was a joke that originally came out of a conference. I think Dana Todd stole it from me, but I probably stole it from her in reality. But it was when they had just announced, Inktomi had announced their, paid inclusion thing, and people would ask questions in the panel, and then we'd be like, air quotes. I don't know. Before I answer this question, are you talking about quote organic SEO or the checkbooks? It was like a sarcastic thing. The PPC thing, but definitely came out of Webmaster World was
somewhere
where most of that stuff. Well, like the word SERP. Brett Tabke invented the word SERP. That's definitely came out of that old forum, and that's where all the pill guys. That's where the dudes that really were making $50K a month in their underwear in their basement selling phentermine and Viagra and stuff. And that's I don't recall who originally made it, but that's definitely where all
somewhere
the
from Webmaster World, probably.
pills,
yeah.
porn, and casino guys.
Well, as far as Dana's concerned, we're actually going to be chatting with her on one of these episodes, and so we'll set the record straight.
I just tell her I concede.
Okay.
I did steal it from her because I'm responsible for all the inappropriate ones that we can't use anymore, like link juice and stuff like that. But that was from back when Todd and I podcasted. It was a different time. You could
Some
say
years ago.
You could say and do stuff that probably wouldn't work in this era.
iTunes is the strictest, I think. I think they're the ones that make me flag. Like, no one else cares if there's profanity, but iTunes has a little thing where if there's profanity in a podcast, you have to flip a little thing in iTunes, and otherwise they will smack you down.
It's good to know they're listening, though.
Yeah, so they say. It's just
Right.
the AI.
It's hard for Dave to not, swear on any given occasion. So
Well, it used to be, and then I met my now wife, and there was little kids around, and
Right.
that changed my cursing.
gotcha.
Yeah, mine's all in the context of the company, I guess. You get better at that over age because there's definitely some environments where it's not iTunes friendly.
Well, it also depends on what sports I'm watching. So
There is that, yes.
All right, let's just corralling us back. Something that I've been curious to know, and this has been interesting for me to hear the responses from everyone with this question. But what's one thing that Greg? What's one thing you wish you knew back? I guess that now that you wish you would have known when you first started in this industry.
Like I said earlier, when the original early days, we spent a lot of time mocking paid people, and kind of like how people who do local got mocked for a while with the idea and if I had to do it all over again, I would have put way more effort into the paid side of things because where we are now, it's
Pretty much all paid.
I'm not going to say SEO is dead because I've stood up and defended that argument for a lot of years, but it's when you look at
Watch out though, Dave. He's going to interpret that, and he's thrown me under the bus before. He's going to say Greg Boser says that SEO is dead. You watch.
No, I wouldn't say it's dead, but it's certainly in decline. I mean, there's just it's not even a debatable point, really.
well, when the first results under the fold of the page, come on.
Yeah.
Well, that's my point. It's like, with clients, it's like, yeah, you are number one organic. That means you're actually number 17 on the middle of page 2. Like there's just you can't overcome that. There's not a way to algorithmically trick or make better content. That's just the world that we live in. And in an audio, and now paid is so complicated. Like, I have mad respect for paid professionals now because it's not what it was when we used to make fun of them when it was go-to,
Good grief.
10 cents. And that's really all it was. It's just write a check and you can be, and now with, retargeting and it's just a very complex discipline. So, if I had it to do over again, as much as I was always a champion for organic rules, and I still think it is the best lead when you can get it. But we now live in a thing where SEO is really more about fighting for display than it is ranking.
Well, I guess that's perfect kind of jump into. I was going to save this for later, but I think it's the perfect segue into it. Where do you see SEO being in 5 years, 10 years? I mean, do you see it being dead in 10 years? Do you see some form of it? What do you think?
I think with anything, that the life cycle of death is longer than people typically, just for example, this discussion's been going on for 15 years, right?
Yeah.
And I'll, Dave and I, this is a great example, we saw it coming. So Dave and I are in this private group on Facebook where somebody in that group who works for a super major brand posted about how offended they were with how the SERP layouts look now with how Google's controlling everything. Well, these are the same companies that volunteered to be pioneers of the, what we call predatory aggregation when Google was saying, hey, if you mark up your stuff, we can read it better. We'll give you this super cool expanded listing that is going to get more clicks. Well, it really was a listing that just collected data for Google to convince them that they should just scrape everybody's stuff and show it on the page without, right? So the short run, those big companies were the cool kids in the club and had a momentary benefit by participating in this. But in the big picture, they're all screwed now. Yeah. And we're now at a place where it's just the organic listing is just not part of what they ultimately care about. And now everything we do as SEO people is, trying to get our question in the PAA section, right? And it's markup and it's about trying to leverage the different ways they display stuff and getting in there. It's not really about ranking better per se, and it's fighting for a lot of crumbs in a lot of ways. And there's certain spaces now, and especially ones that are dominant with mobile, as terrible as this sound is, like there's a lot of areas where organic is a waste of time because 80% of your audience is on a phone and they do want instant answers. And even on an iPad Pro, right? The organics below the fold on page 2, and mobile users just don't tend to go that route. So even when you are still the best with all the organic signals, the opportunity to be seen is, far less than it was. And I don't see, other than maybe an antitrust thing that splits it up and all of a sudden we're all using DuckDuckGo, which could, I'm not saying that can't happen because nobody thought Alta Vista would ever die. It's all about timing and the perfect storm, but I don't see the Google thing changing without an intervention of something, at that magnitude. So it's definitely not as fun as it was, and it's a different space for sure.
Yeah, and I don't know if Dave had something to jump in on, but I'm going to say something really quick.
I'll go after you.
It reminds me, when we're talking about this wild west, the good old days, whatever. It just reminds me how it's amazing to think back to how even something like just changing a simple title tag could take you from page 3 to page 1, way back in the day, and just to try to explain to someone that's in the industry now, or try to give kids, the kids that are in the industry now, any kind of advice. It's interesting because I don't even know where I would begin in trying to tell them what it used to be like, because the things that they have to do now, with what you were mentioning, even with the paid and just the organic side, the local, everything that has to happen. I just think back to some of those first websites that I'd built and how I had just changed the title tag and I went from page 3 to page number 1, and that was it, and I was like a god to the people that I did it for. You know what I mean?
And now that stuff has been, the stuff that you do have control over has been so neutered that honestly, in most scenarios, title tags are they mean nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, all the way back in.
I mean, especially when they're rewriting them for you.
Well, that's the thing, you know. In I don't know, 2010, when I spent time at that other venture of mine that I don't speak of by name, but
He who shall not be named.
yeah. But even way back then, we did so much testing there, and I can remember I would go in without telling any of my partners and delete all the titles off the site and the blog, like just remove them. I'd save them in a spreadsheet, right? So I could put them back, and really made virtually no difference in how stuff ranked because Google would just rewrite them, and so now the title tag is really more like the description, in the sense that it has some value from a clickability standpoint, but it doesn't have a whole hell of a lot of ranking value because they change it so often. So
I guess before I let Dave jump in with his question, because it's a perfect segue. So what kind of advice do you give the kids these days then? Like, what's the Greg advice to the kids?
learn how to run AdWords. Get people to pay you 10% of a bloated spend, because that's like a great gig. You know what I mean? Like, there's no incentive to really get their spend down because you're working off the cut. So as far as a career longevity, I just think there's way more long-term value. I hate to say this because I've always been the champion of organic, but if any kid came to me now and said, hey, that's the specialty I want to go into, I'd tell them you're a fool. It's just, and that's why, like, our agency, we're primarily a content shop, as far as I don't do the level of high technical kind of SEO stuff, because in the big picture, it just doesn't matter that much anymore, to the degree where it's maybe the best way to spend. But great content that can be shared socially and drive people to your site that way, and links for the stuff that is out there, links still do matter. So content strategy is really kind of where my SEO is at. It's a lot less about, hey, your title tag's too long, or that minutia. Because having worked with very large, the 800-pound gorillas that listen to only 10% and they still dominate because that's just the way the algorithm works. So how much value you get out of that stuff really depends on who you are and where you are on the totem pole, more than the individual tweaks, which is sad to me.
Yeah, it is, but it's so true. Like, I think, as you were saying that, I think back to Avalanche Media, and I'm the original founder of it. It was just me that started it, and I look back to, all I did was SEO, and then I look at where it is today, and so you think about, this was an SEO company, quote unquote, but now we have like 20 designer slash video type people. We have like 10 PR, outreach, link building type people. We have like a paid team of 5 or 6, and we have like 3 SEOs.
Right.
And
then the hardest thing too in that environment now is to quantify the value of the cost of the spend, right? It's like, because paid is so instantaneous. I spend X today, and tomorrow I know whether it worked or not. So trying to make that, and everything now is so much longer term. And I this one time, Matt was great about showing up in the bar with his notebook late at night, and he didn't drink, right? At conferences.
I think he was on Sprite.
Yeah, and he was very good at faking like he was drinking. But, we'd always get in these conversations where I would say, way too much, and we would just have these debates on the whole cat and mouse thing. And I said to him one time, dude, it's all about shelf life, right? Like, you keep fighting it, but as long as my ROI on the money back in the 30-day updates, where every 30 days, it's like, I don't want you to torch it, but I expect you to torch it, and I don't really care, because in that 30-day thing, I can make way more money in that 30 days than it cost me to build it. So until you can stretch out that time period and make it a much more longer play for a return, more like, slow stock growth versus high volatility day trading kind of thing, you're never going to win that battle, because the one for next month's already lined up and in the chute, and we're just going to keep doing that because it's highly, highly profitable, and you haven't figured out how to stop it. Well, they have, to a large degree, slowed down dramatically and lengthened the time that it takes to see real growth organically from stuff. I mean, I literally, we've done stuff for clients where we worked for them a long time, built all kinds of links, and they haven't been a client in 6 months to a year, and now all of a sudden things are starting to ramp. You know, it's a longer haul. So that, from even selling, trying to sell, it becomes a much more difficult thing to sell to larger organizations, because somebody has to report to their boss, I'm going to spend X, and here's what I'm going to get out of it, and here's how long it's going to take. It's
not going to impact this quarter or even this half of the year.
And when it comes to budgets, and you guys know how all that works, people that have they got to spend their money this quarter, and then somebody's going to sit them down and say, okay, I gave you this much, and what did we get out of it? And they're not planning for that discussion 3 budgets from now. They're planning it for the end of this quarter. You know what I mean? Like, and so it really takes a different kind of client that really sees that long-term commitment and is willing to go all in and not make judgments on the investment until much, much farther down the road.
Some years ago, I don't remember what I signed at this point, but I went out to Google, and it was like some sort of agency day, and they were asking us questions about XYZ, and could we get our large clients to do this stuff? And I had a Fortune 100 client we were working on a site migration with, and this was already 3 years in the process before they even brought us on. And now we were 2 years out, and I think at the time we were launching it within the next, 1 to 3 months or so, or maybe a couple months after that. And they're like, oh, well, what about this and this and this? And, I don't know what they were asking us about. But I was like, they've spent the last 4 years updating the site and have all of these projects. They've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on this project. It's not going to be mobile friendly for another 3 to 5 years unless they can easily patch that CMS. They can't do this in the time you want. Right. And I always thought that was interesting that Google would roll out like the previous next and canonicals and roll out these things. And if you're a small company, like what you're talking about, Greg, there's certain things you can do, like title tags don't matter, or maybe they do for some, but there's little things that Google rolls out and then expects everyone to hop and install, and you can't.
Well, then here's the real insane.
Or they roll it back and don't tell us.
I have a lot of experience with a large brand that I won't name, but your lovely wife is familiar with, and they invested a ton of money on the whole responsive design, one site for everybody, right? And that was prior, like literally millions of dollars building the site that way. And then once it's there, it's like,
it's there for years.
AMP, hey. And now all of a sudden people in that company, oh my God, we have to. It's like, no, you don't. No, it's stupid. And if you spend your time responding to every little time that they're trying to tweak and change how the web works, whether it's, my thing is like, let's work on speed, and like if it works, it works. And the idea, and you lose so much for a company like that that's so ad driven, because AMP can be so limiting, but people internally are so conditioned to Google called us, like they want to have a meeting with us.
Yeah, because if you do it, then they're hoping others will do it. That's why.
Right, and so they pick the big 800-pound gorillas and try to give them short-term preferential treatment, but it ultimately costs them millions of dollars. And at the end of the day, it's really
even more, because you're putting off other projects that actually had ROI.
Yes.
Like AMP for me, when people ask me about it, and I still don't recommend it for most people, but I was like, why? Can you put a form on there? No, you can't. But I'm like, then what's? I'm pretty much 90% of the clients I've ever worked with are either B2B, B2C, but they're all lead gen.
Right.
If I can't put a money-making thing on there, what good is it?
Oh, I can't tell you in the WordPress world how many sites got destroyed because they just turned on the automatic plugin
AMP
plugin that turns every single, like you have no control over. And then, all their lead forms just vanish, and they don't really know They just were told that, yeah, so there's so many problems. And then on a large enterprise scale, you're right, the resources, and I remember having that conversation. It's like, okay, let's suppose you did do this, invest all this time. There's so many other things that impact your speed that Ant probably isn't going to fix on their own. And you spend all this time moving to a better brand thing, and now you want your stuff served off of Google's, all the, and it's just not the best place to spend your money, because at the end of the day, like they basically were threatening, like, hey, we're going to get exclusive this, and if you want to stay in the carousel and all that stuff.
Yep.
And my argument was, no, you're brand XYZ, that you're going to still be there because people expect you to, I don't. And sure enough, they've kind of backtracked now, saying that the carousel will become more friendly to equally speedy sites that aren't necessarily. I mean, it's a big bluff, and that's just how they roll. And it's unfortunate because a lot of great stuff didn't happen across a lot of great companies because of that whole dynamic.
And I see Matt trying to jump in, but I have another question for Mr. Greg. That I think is going to be the question you wanted to ask, Matt, because I can just tell. It's so when you think back, we were talking about the like Google, and you were just talking about it even now, just Google going to those 800 gorillas and asking them to do things ahead of everyone else, whether it's AMP or something else. It's interesting to think back how Google categorizes sites, and you can use Google News, they can do a bunch of things, but over the years they probably started with DMOZ. I mean, it's local listings and different citations. They had Freebase so that they can, go beyond just what a website is, what entities are, what.
I mean, they stole Freebase?
Oh yeah, that too.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting the number of things that they've bought, stole, pillaged, and borrowed, scraped. Is there anything that you have seen them either buy or acquire in any way that maybe hasn't been utilized yet, or maybe you don't think they're fully utilizing yet, that we could see in the next couple of years?
I'll never forget the day that they bought the flight scheduling software company.
I think they just started fully rolling.
Right.
Rolling.
This was several years ago,
yeah.
And this is a great story because I was actually in the offices of a prominent ticket flight comparison site. Great company at the time. At 250, they built their business on organic SEO like everybody else did back when Google's professed mission was just to get you to where the content is as quickly as possible.
ORD to LV searches were always so much traffic. I may have worked in that space.
And they and all the companies in that space use that software.
Yeah, everyone
license deal, and and they had attempted to go down some legal roads, but they honestly didn't believe that deal will happen. I was actually in the office with them when it got announced, and it's just devastating. A lot of really good people really sad because now the person that controls the search users owns the software that you guys all use, and how's that going to work? And the interesting thing about that, I feel like it's taken a lot longer, to get to where they are now with it, where you type in cheap flights to whatever, and Google's just going to spit it out. And I think because there was so much outrage and it drew attention that a lot of times they'll shelve stuff for a while and just let it blow over. They'll get over it, and when nobody's paying attention, then we'll just chip our way back in. The real estate space is the other one. Ultimately they are going to be the MLS of the world, and they've taken a slower approach to it, other than how, I used to do a lot of work in that space. When you type in real estate Las Vegas, you would get websites of actual real estate agents that live and serve and work in that area. And then when everything went bad and the market tanked and everything, and all of a sudden all that stuff got replaced by the Zillows of the world, who at the time weren't technical Google partners, but lo and behold now, So there's definitely a thing where they foster and monitor stuff for either like we'll buy it someday or we'll destroy it someday. You know, we'll let them have their place because we can collect the data and we can really quantify how much value we'll get out of it if and when we decide to make that go away. And a lot of the stuff they've taken longer on than I would have thought 10 years ago. But that doesn't mean it's not happening, right?
I find it interesting because, you know, just speaking about with what you're, you know, with the airline stuff, like one of the first clients that we've had for a long time was one in that industry, and I knew the team. I knew that there was like 20 of them, and it was devastating. I remember about that same time, like with what you were talking about when the announcements were made. And it's interesting to me though that because what you're saying, like the slow death, like still to this day that site makes money, nowhere near what it was whenever it could support, you know, 20 employees and you know the owners were making good profits and stuff like that. But it's just amazing to me that there's still those, and I don't know if it's like the old people that's the site they've always used and that's the one they're going to continue to use.
There's definitely that in it, you know, and and that's the downside about SEO as a career, because during that time period, SEO really became more of a triage operation where you're trying to reduce the bleeding. It's no longer moving that needle to the upper right corner of the graph. It's more about slowing down in those kind of spaces. Third party, you know, and I can remember seeing these companies down and saying, look, at the end of the day, the only third party aggregation that Google will approve of is them. They are going to come after every viable third party space and wipe you from the face of the earth eventually. Like, you need to plan for that and build other monetization, you know, that kind of stuff. And a lot of them thought I was just overly cynical and crazy. You know, but here we are.
Yeah, here we are.
And that took a lot of the fun out of the gig for me in a lot of ways, because you know, the comparison shopping, I did a lot of large scale stuff in those areas over the years for more than one company in those spaces, and always felt that they had a viable, legitimate service, you know, that was worthy, and not so much anymore. And you look like all the battlings with the Expedia and the reviews and all that kind of stuff that's been going on. And they're chipping away.
Yeah.
And nobody cares.
Well, this has been fascinating for me. I don't know, Dave, if you have any last minute questions for Greg here, but
Nope, I know you got one more.
But I do appreciate the time that you've taken with us, Greg, and I guess what I'd say, maybe just share with people exactly like what you're doing now to this day, like, you know, how
Causing
things,
trouble.
Yeah, what kind of trouble you causing? What's with the future, Greg, and just anything you want us to know, or where to find you, businesses, anything like that.
Surprising and possibly sad thing is I'm not really causing any trouble. You know, I hung up the public side of this gig a couple years ago, so I don't, and which is why it's nice to hang out with you guys and chat.
Which I was going to say, by the way, thank you for that. Like, we really do appreciate you coming on, knowing that side of it with you too. So
yeah, and I will say that the one thing that I do miss is going to the shows and, you know, hanging out with guys like you and having these conversations in the 3D world. But so, you know, I made that decision a couple years ago, and other than the friendships and not getting to hang out with my buddies in person as often, I don't really miss it. So now things are, you know, for those that don't know, like I run a content agency with Lauren Baker that's small and cushy, but does well. It's in a very solid spot for us as far as, I don't know that we're motivated to make it grow a whole lot, but it's a good gig. And
well, you've been there and you've seen that too, and you've seen.
Yeah, honestly, you know, that last debacle that I never speak of by name, but really the best thing that came out of it for me is meeting, and I knew Lauren Baker before then, but so now we've worked together, in that company, his realm and him and I work together daily.
Yeah.
And that, when that all imploded, the one positive thing that came out with that was our working relationship and some internal models that we'd built that may not have worked well at that bloated scale, but we thought would work really well going back to scratch and starting as a boutique thing. And it's worked out really well. You guys, he's the greatest people person on the planet.
He is.
He's that guy that even when we screw up, people love him. So,
it's good to have one of those.
That's a great thing to have because, and it's the personal relationships and stuff. We have clients that we've worked with from way back then. And so I don't know that there's, anything big and huge on the horizon with that. I'm at that point where, the one downside of that gig is that it doesn't really need me that much. So on a personal level, I'm starting to get a little anxious for something to sink my teeth into. So, but most of those projects are stuff that wouldn't involve, any kind of, like stuff that has long-term back-end kind of deal stuff. So I work on potential like that. So I don't know that there's anything super cool and exciting coming down the pike.
Well, that
I publicly announced, but I'm still around. I'm just lurking in the bushes.
You're in good company with those of us that like to lurk.
Right?
When I see Greg's name pop up in a group, I'm like, uh-oh. Because he doesn't pop his head up in the group very often, and every so often he will.
Yeah, it's just I'm kind of enjoying that a little bit. Just sitting back and watching and chuckling when nobody can hear me.
Well, again, Greg, I do appreciate you taking some time and chatting with us for this session. This has been great, and it's been fun going down memory lane. And I don't know, any final thoughts, Dave?
Nope. Thanks for turning off the AC.
Yeah, it's good. I'm getting a little hot here in Vegas, so it's just perfect time to
go
wrap
jump
it
in
up.
the pool.
But
Go jump in that pool, that nice backyard oasis you built.
Exactly. But congratulations, you guys, on 100 episodes.
And thank you for being a part of it. And so we're really glad that you're on it. So for Greg and Dave, I'm Matt with this latest episode, our 100th series. And so thank you guys for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye.
Thanks.
Talk to you guys